Our world faces many real challenges. Without doubt, the biggest collective challenge facing all of humanity is how we tackle what's happening to our climate.
A big part of the problem has been the way this has been discussed for decades, based upon a sensationalist, fear-driven narrative that stokes division. You see, when any human is put in a place of fear or catastrophe, we all respond with a variation of one of three ways: fight, flight or freeze. We're hardwired that way. The inevitable consequences of these understandable responses all sow discord, which mean collective action is paradoxically even harder to achieve.
We understand that it has been a human innovation which has unwittingly put us in the climate situation we are in.
We also know that it is human innovation and collective action that is our only ticket to a sustainable future. Most of the technology required to keep temperature rises to 1.5 degrees has already been invented. These examples of climate action need to be shared and better understood.
We don't have time, nor do we believe we have to wait to be told what to do. We have ultimate faith in humanity's ability to innovate and find solutions.
It's what humanity does best, after all. So we believe that we can create a place where those ideas for real climate action can be shared, understood, adopted and adapted by local communities, organisations and businesses around the world. After all, the best antidote to anxiety is action, and we only have one world. We can't grow another one.
So we want to focus on actions, the innovations that are happening and the opportunities for real, radical change they can create.
By doing so, we want to enable communities and people in every part of our planet to get involved. Join us and bring that focus to innovation, the opportunities we can create together,
and let's all renew the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, hi there, I'm Janice Forsyth. A very warm welcome to Renew the World with our second session at the New York Times Climate Hub. Really good to see so many of you here. Thank you very much for being here today. It's a great place to really get our teeth stuck into what we're going to be talking about today. Innovation, opportunity and renewal on prioritising female voices for a just transition. Just to let you know, I'm a broadcaster, also a podcaster. We've set up Scotland's first podcast network, The Big Light. So do check out our daily podcast from COP. It's called COP26 Daily. I had to tell you about that. Now, a question that we've been hearing a lot around COP26, I'm sure you have too, and this escalating climate crisis is, where are all the women? So why are there not more women at the top table when it comes to decision making on creating our sustainable future? Why so few female leaders out of the 140 delegations at this COP? We've all seen that notorious photograph of them. Why does this absence matter, and what the heck are we going to do about it? So we won't have a problem coming up with some solutions today and hearing answers to those questions. We have an amazing young female panel of voices for change from across the UK, and joining them a blindingly brilliant all-women international guest panel to discuss breaking down barriers to women in work and leadership on the most important challenge of our age. So a very warm welcome to all of you, and I think we should have a round of applause. Thank you. And it really is a big old gang of us today. If you've been at these a few other sessions, there's a lot of people on stage, all with interesting things to say. So forgive me, people, if I interrupt you and say move on. It's not rudeness, it's just because we have to keep to a time. We've got 45 minutes to discuss so much, but we hope that we will leave with some positive actual actions instead of just the blah, blah, blah. So let me just introduce you, and I think it's best if the guys give a wave as I do this so you can identify them. So we have, first of all, our four young delegates. Molly Hucker from Wales. There she is. You're going to do a big old wave, not a wee quiet one. And we have Cara Wiley from Scotland. Anjali Middleton from England. And Anna Kernahan from Northern Ireland. Brilliant. So we're really looking forward to hearing from all of you, and indeed from our guest panel, who between them have notched up so much experience across academia, business, investment, finance, clean energy, and social and climate activism. They are Dr. Poonam Malik. Give us a wave. We have Jennifer Finn, Divya Nawali, Freddie Campbell, and we have Scottish Government Cabinet Secretary Kate Forbes. Great to have you all here. So you'll hear more on this inspiring global lineup as we proceed. And of course we do know, the thing is we do know that women are everywhere at COP. You just look on social media and there are so many women doing such great stuff. Generations too, intergenerational people linking arms, reaching out to collaborate on change and action on climate. And there are various research studies that show that women's leadership strengthens not just democratic processes and climate innovation, but also delivers solutions, that wonderful thing, for effective and progressive policy change. So getting into women into leadership clearly across these sectors is a no-brainer in terms of the benefit it brings to climate action. So let's hear first from Anjali Middleton. Maybe Anjali, first of all, you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your campaign, Choked Up.
Yes, so hi, I'm Anjali Middleton. I'm 18 and a year ago I co-founded Choked Up, which is a campaign that seeks to tackle air pollution and was founded by young black and brown teenagers. And a key focus of our campaign is looking at the disproportionate impacts of air pollution and climate change on these communities. So my question for the panel is, knowing that women are disproportionately exposed to this crisis by making up 70% of the world's poor and generally being more reliant on the land and natural resources for their livelihoods, how can we best protect women's livelihoods and industries and their futures from the worst impacts of climate change?
Fantastic question, thank you, Anjali. Well, let's turn to Divya Nawali first of all, because you work in energy in Southeast Asia, so perfect to hear from about this. Maybe you could just first of all tell us a little bit about your work and the challenges that maybe face women in that sector too.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So I come from India, but I've lived across the US, UK, and spent a bit of time across Southeast Asia the last few years working in the energy sector, focusing especially on energy policy and supporting renewable energy programs. And I think that question is really relevant because one of the things that I'm really concerned about is women's health. And that is something that is not discussed about when it comes to, like, say, clean cooking or it comes to even energy efficiency. Women have so much power. I truly believe that women will save the world. I'll give an example from Indonesia in energy efficiency. It is said that the highest amount of appliance usage that happens is rice cookers. There. And who cooks the rice? It's the women. Rice is basically the staple of Southeast Asia. And so if you could empower women and let them know that if instead of putting that, small plug which says warm on that rice and just said that, you don't have to keep it warm all day long, but you can use it as you need and make it more efficient, we could save so much of coal burning, far away, miles away in a coal power plant. So that's something that can only come through education and awareness. So what we need is behavior programs, especially in the energy space. And I believe that women are more empowered to take such behavior solutions. So I think it's a mix of education and awareness programs for women, directed towards women, that could really bring about a substantial amount of change.
Thank you. And let's hear from Dr. Poonam Malik now, because obviously we need more diverse voices and skills, and you're an entrepreneurial academic business strategy leader and an investor in innovation. So how do we open the doors, do you think, to more women and more diverse voices?
So that's an interesting point, which I don't think so there should be two ways about it. Biologically, naturally, we are 50-50. But when it comes to decision making, you said that picture was very stark. So the question is, it is at the heart, and I'm sure our ministers here, Cabinet Secretary will tell, it is policy level. So at the decision making influencing those decisions, how are we making? The other aspect of it is funding level. And obviously, Divya mentioned the education and awareness. But it's what solutions are we providing? How are we elevating the women? Education is the key. As you say, you educate one woman, you educate a family, you educate a society, and you educate the country and the world. So education level, but also resource appliances. So you mentioned about the clean or pollution of cooking, indoor cooking. I happened to work there was a University of Edinburgh program, Respire, where we were looking at the health, the COPD, asthma levels in women who are indoor. It's a massive problem, and it is the result of that smoke going inside and circling, because there's no exhaust, there is nothing. And as a result, the lungs are actually coated. And who's responsible? Nobody measures that. So it's the way the socioeconomic differences are there. So the provision from the policy level and supplying of clean cookers doesn't take much effort, but it's need to be awareness that if society has given women the job of cooking, then they are the sufferers. A more entrepreneurial aspect, when new solutions are developing, who's looking into that they are provided? And then from the funding level, it's the corporate and the partners coming in together to say, how are we able to provide that and bring more women's voice into that decision making? I think those decisions will be the key.
Thank you. And Scottish businesswoman Jennifer Finn is Managing Director of an energy efficiency contractor in the construction industry. Is that still very much male dominated? Is it changing?
I would say it's definitely changing. So let's take a positive view on this. Absolutely, it's changing. I think it's a shame that we're still talking about this, and it's a shame that you're still asking that question, because I think when we know we have truly succeeded, it's when we're no longer talking about gender and these types of issues. Yeah. But I think, where we are right now, yes, it has to be brought to the fore. I think, making examples of people, and really for me it's about breaking down the barriers. So rather than looking at, what's disproportionate, what seems unfair, let's look at the underlying reasons why. Clearly the progress that's been made across the world is disproportionate, that there are certain countries that have made, greater advancements than others. And I think it's about us understanding in each of those regions, in each of those areas, what are the underlying issues, and approaching that conversation with a curiosity and an understanding, trying to take the heat out of the conversation and, allow people to be open and honest about how they feel about these things and where the gaps are and how we can re-educate in that kind of safe space.
Yeah, no, I think that's the big aim, isn't it, that we get beyond the stage of having to discuss this.
Absolutely.
Because it's actually happening. Anjali, what do you make of what you've heard so far?
I completely agree. I think that it's really important that we seek female leadership. And I think it's really telling that women are so engaged and so passionate about this issue, and so many of the major and most high-profile climate activists in the world today are young women. But none of them seem to be in the decision-making rooms, and none of them are actually there. And so I think there's clearly a disconnect, and there's clearly barriers that are stopping young women and women generally from getting into these rooms. And I think it's time that we start to address these and not just talk about them, because I feel like people are starting to talk about marginalised voices a lot more, but they're using that as an excuse to not actually give them a space to speak, and not actually giving them a real position in these decision-making rooms. And so I think your work is really important, and what you're doing sounds really promising.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, Kate Forbes is Scottish Government Cabinet Secretary for Finance and the Economy. You are a decision maker, you are at the top table. I wonder, from your own personal experience and political experience, I mean, is everything you're hearing sort of coming home to roost in a way? It's kind of like, what the heck can we do to actually make change here, and to invite brilliant young women like we're hearing from today as part of that decision-making process?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think leadership is such a critical part of this. And we saw just at the beginning of this week, for example, a number of female heads of state signing a joint statement saying, wait a minute, there is a gender dimension to climate change, and therefore women need to be part of finding the solutions. And certainly in Scotland, we have the advisory group on women and girls, and they challenge us all the time to go further and faster, right across policy platforms. But I know myself, coming into politics for the first time, there's still, I got elected in 2016, there's still an adjustment required. First time I went out campaigning with a senior male politician, I went to a few doors and they just thought I was his wife rather than the candidate for election. But, I love catching people by surprise. But the fact that that's still a surprise in 2016 and perhaps still a surprise today in many countries shows how much work it needs to be done. But from my perspective, it's exactly what Poonam said. It's about policy. Every single policy should be viewed through a gender lens, because we are talking at the moment about a just transition. We're talking about inequalities that are going to be exacerbated as a result of climate change. Those inequalities existed already. Climate change is going to make them worse unless we truly believe in a just transition. And my view is that a just transition is not inevitable. You have to create it, you have to make it, and if we believe in delivering it, then we better make sure that 50% of the world's population are part of the decision-making process.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, we're going to move on to our next discussion point, which comes from Cara Wiley. Cara, what is your point in your question?
Given that Indigenous people make up only 6.2% of the population, but are estimated to protect 8% of the world's remaining biodiversity, I'd like to know more about the importance of Indigenous knowledge and when passing on this understanding and incorporating this ancient expertise into climate action with leaders and decision makers.
Thank you very much indeed. So, Cara, I'd like to introduce you to, on my other side, Freddie Campbell, who works in clean energy microgrids. So, Freddie, again, if you just tell us a wee bit about yourself and the Indigenous groups that you work with.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that question, Karen. I'll speak to the context on Turtle Island, also known as Canada, where I was born and raised. I'm from a Métis family, which is an Indigenous community in Canada, and I also have some Scottish and UK lineage, so happy to see maybe some relations here. I think Indigenous ways of knowing and being have been around for centuries, as you have said, and that knowledge has been passed down both orally and in scripture from generation to generation. And within that knowledge, there is a pathway to climate solutions, to sustaining the lands, to thinking 7 generations ahead and not just thinking that instantaneous next step of efficiency and power and product. So it's so important to bring those voices into these conversations, so much so that on Turtle Island, also known as Canada, there are thousands of Indigenous communities leading the way for a just clean energy transition. Over thousands of projects that are being done from small to large scale. And that has only occurred with capacity building mechanisms that have been done by and for Indigenous people. They were brought to the table and we really worked through how can we break down some of those barriers and deconstruct the colonial ways that have been embedded into our systems. And then that also impacts policy, that also impacts funding streams, government level decisions, and everything has to be discussed, and in order to do that, Indigenous voices need to come to the table, as well as voices of women, girls, 2S LGBTQIA folks with disabilities, youth, elders, bringing it all together.
Yeah, oh my goodness me, I'm just imagining that world now. Bring it on, eventually. And Divya, women are leading successful community groups across the world. Have you seen firsthand what we're talking about in action?
Yeah, of course. In India especially, I work with many NGOs where we have self-help groups and skills and livelihood programs for women who are able to learn like basket weaving or like handbag making and things like that. And so they are really like moving out of their homes and actually creating these livelihoods. And these are sustainable livelihoods, basically, because they're good for the environment. A cloth bag is always good for the environment. And I proudly use these because I think it's not just about the climate, but also the fact that women who are essentially driving the climate movement. And like Anjali identified, all women are leading it. All these young women activists around the world are creating this entire kind of movement, which has never been seen before. And what's more interesting is that I have had the opportunity to be mentored by some really amazing women environmentalists as well. And I think what's really the future is that the women who have had some exposure to working, especially like Kate and others, to be able to now guide the women who are coming into the space. And I think I'm looking forward to that, and that's going to be a part of the Just Transition. A huge part of the Just Transition is to have these young women to be able to make their way into these boardrooms.
Yeah, oh, amazing, thank you. I keep feeling like we should cheer after everything you're saying. It's also blooming inspiring. Cara, what do you make of what you've heard so far?
It's it's very inspiring for like, my generation sort of.
Yeah.
Another question I've got is that how have like your projects have been like rolled out, like how have you seen like how the impact has helped sort of like where in the future would you like to see your projects happen?
Yes, so how have your projects helped those communities, and where else would you like to see those projects happen? Divya?
I think a lot of what I've seen is that they're happening in the urban spaces. I've worked with cities very closely. I have worked essentially, in urban centers. I feel like it's happening faster. It's not happening as fast as in rural areas, and I think that's where the real action is. Some of the most vulnerable populations are in these rural spaces where there's not enough adaptation measures, or there's not enough technology, and so I think we cannot talk about just transition, especially say for example now, as like a coal plant is shut down and we're moving towards renewable energy, right? So all these livelihoods, especially in rural areas and remote regions where it's not easy for these people to kind of shift their livelihood to something else. It is really important for them to be given the skills and training to move towards and transition towards these new circular economy principles as well. So I think there's a lot of capacity building and training that needs to be made available. And I want that I would envision that it would be better to have that in rural areas, because that's where the just transition is much required.
Yeah, I wonder, Poonam, what your perspective is on this particular discussion.
So I think, as I said, that the stories we tell create the reality, and it's time that we move beyond the storytelling and move where it's limited by gender. I think we need to move together to look forward. You're talking about 5% of women, which is maintaining 80% of the biodiversity for the world. Similarly, if we bring it across here to Scotland, we have a wonderful organization, Nature Scout. It is led by women. So when given the chance, and there are so many startup world that I see, women are passionate about these things naturally. So when they take up a cause, they go for it's the heart. So impact leader Ronnie Cohn, I was at a global venturing conference yesterday, and he says invisible heart is leading the invisible hand, and that exactly is what we require in this case, that if we need to take care of our biodiversity, nature-based solutions, we cannot let 50% of the voices, 50% of the talent, there is immense talent here. Why are they not there at that decision-making table? And as Anjali was saying, I don't think so it's the question of we let them. I think we need to go together. And the question there that I always ask my audience, and whenever we speak, is that you are the leaders. If 85% or 90% men are leading, then they need to be realizing the potential and encouraging that pipeline of talent. Then only we can reach that.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Well, we've heard Freddie's perspective from the Northern Hemisphere, Divya from the South Asian Hemisphere, and now we have a short video to show you from Tandika, who works as a senior wastewater technician for Umgeni Water in South Africa.
I'm Tandika Dwaha. I'm a chemical engineer by profession. I come from South Africa. Being in the water and sanitation sector has made me understand that there is an intricate balance between climate change and water resource management, which has led to talks of climate resilient water management. So a few projects that I've been involved in, which look at finding solutions to climate resiliency, have been reimagining wastewater as a resource, where we look at trying to produce electricity from wastewater, as well as reimagining or rethinking how we source water, and also being able to teach our communities about the importance of preserving and conserving nature through planting of trees, water talks, environmental talks, you name it. So I'm really looking forward to being part of a team that will be looking at climate resilient solutions and ensuring a sustainable future for all.
Well, a big thanks to Tandika Jawara there with a really good message of hope and positivity on creating climate resilience and bolstering biodiversity through water resource management. And Kate Forbes, just briefly, tell us a wee bit about what's happening in Scotland to support climate resilience here, but also in places like Malawi.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I love what I heard earlier, because if you're trying to operate on a cross-border basis, in other words, we have much to learn from what's going on in other parts of the world, and perhaps much to share too, that if you work through standard traditional infrastructure of power, then we keep hitting our head off a brick wall, because you're going to meet that problem of not enough female decision makers. So through our Climate Justice Fund, which we're doubling over the course of this Parliament, we try and work with trusted partners at a grassroots level in places like Malawi, Rwanda, Pakistan, and elsewhere. And it's never just about the money. It's all about the reskilling and the empowering, working with women to try and support them as they find themselves the solutions to the challenges that they face. So that's just an example of some of the work we're doing.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's move on to our next discussion point, a really important issue raised by our Welsh guest, Molly Hucker. So over to you, Molly.
Thank you. My name's Molly and I'm a South Wales-based climate activist. And I come from a community that was built on the back of the coal mining industry. And one thing that worries me about the just transition is that we're not talking enough about accessibility and making sure that we leave no one behind. And I'm worried because we need to see governments making the most sustainable option, the most affordable, convenient and available option. So my question to panellists is, how do we achieve that transition and make sure that we're bringing along some impoverished communities with us?
Thank you very much indeed. As I said, that's such an important question. It really is, and it affects everybody sitting here today, and I'm sure in the audience too. Let me turn to you, Jennifer Finn. I mean, with your experience, you must have encountered this. Tell us about your strategies and what you think in a broader way about this issue.
Absolutely. So, I mean, we are faced with this on a daily basis in the work that we deliver. We're a main contractor and we deliver major refurbishment energy efficiency projects to social housing projects across Scotland. So we are dealing with those in at times more challenging positions. People are maybe living in fuel poverty or poverty in general. So I think, you know, when we're looking at some of the challenges around this just transition, it's looking at, you know, diversity across all its facets. And I guess, you know, where we have this massive challenge, there is the opportunity with it as well. So it's about understanding where we can create jobs, but where we can create jobs that are appropriate for people, and bringing down the barriers or the perceived barriers that perhaps stand in people's way. I think, you know, conversations like this are great to start that, but there's clearly a lot of action that needs to follow up on that to support and ensure that we're bringing people on that journey with us. So it means skills in the right areas, it means the right mechanisms, funding mechanisms to support, you know, business initiatives. You know, for example, we run a skills academy that we operate kind of regionally. The whole idea behind that is more of a community-led approach, so that we are getting into some of the areas, you know, in Scotland, for example, say Ayrshire, for example, who's had similar challenges on the back of kind of the demise of coal. So it's where we can create good quality green jobs for people within those areas at all levels of the supply chain and at all levels of the organisation.
Yeah, so a holistic approach is what is needed. Molly, what's your reaction to what you've heard?
Yeah, definitely. I think that we need to make sure that we're talking to communities and asking them what jobs they would like as well, what jobs they need. Because I think communities can really be hubs to tackling the climate emergency. And I think collective action is definitely something that it shows a credit to that as well. And I mean, we've seen that in the streets of Glasgow today with the march. You know, when people share ideas, we definitely get farther than we ever will alone.
Yeah. And it's not any kind of mathematical perspective I had, but certainly looking out of my window today, which was right in the centre of Glasgow, it's like I was overwhelmed by the number of young women on that march. So there were guys there as well, boys there too, but overwhelmingly brilliant young women. So it's so important that we absolutely address that. Thank you very much indeed, Molly. As I say, just an absolutely vital question. Let's move on to our final discussion point, because if hearing from diverse voices and ensuring an inclusive approach works to get us closer to our sustainable targets, what is holding us back? What do we need to do? And this is something that concerns climate activist and writer Anna Kernahan from Belfast. So Anna, over to you.
Hi, I'm Anna and I'm a climate activist with Fridays for Future, and a huge part of Fridays for Future is raising awareness of how important climate justice course, the climate crisis is inherently intersectional. So even though we're talking about how women are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis, this is increased exponentially if the woman is also part of the LGBT community, is living in poverty, is indigenous, is a person of colour, etc., etc. And so my question is based around more how we can ensure that a just transition also includes the concept of equity and climate justice.
Thank you, Anna. Freddie, we come to you.
Yeah, I would say hi, and thank you for that question. I think it's extremely important. And I was speaking a bit earlier about the impacts and potential of Indigenous-led and owned clean energy projects. And this can be applicable to any sphere, any job. If the community is really at the center, as many of these brilliant folks up here have been saying, then the impact is so much greater. And that can be embedded within a project. I'll take a renewable clean energy project, let's say a solar project. Well, if there is a certain amount of women included within that discussion, elders, youth, folks with disabilities, 2S LGBTQI+ folks being brought to the table and being trained and worked with to really make that much more of an impact, it can be so successful. And that also comes into different discussions at each level of the project, because all voices are so important. And when we're talking about taking that collective action, as you meant, we really have to work as a team together, and that can be done in any case, but those folks have to be more than just at the table, but in decision-making roles. And I think it's, again, a no-brainer. If everyone is included and you can make that much more impactful of a project or a job or a position, then why not? We only have a certain amount of time, and we need to take action now, and it should be done in the right way, and it can be. And there are many examples of that. So great question.
Thank you. Yeah, a brilliant question. And just thinking of picking up, and disability has been mentioned. I'm wondering, Poonam, women with disabilities are so often left out of any conversations, and particularly at this kind of level. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you for that question, because as I see it, just transition is not about only the outcomes. Although we talk about that, it's about the process, about how we get there. It's about who we listen to and whose voices are involved and how they are involved as part of engagement and listening to it. And as you say, listening in is very important for the people who are not at the table, who we are missing about. It's rightly said that if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go together. And in this case, we are needing to make sure that no one is left behind, and especially the voices which are marginalized. And COVID has shown us that the people who were at the back end of this, they suffered most. And we don't want to repeat that with the climate change and transformation. So the marginalized society, disability and protected characteristics, whether they are women of color or even people of LGBT and different community. The question is that how we include them and feel inclusive. So it's not that I've invited you, it's people feeling part of it and feeling entitled to it is the crucial point. I'll take the example of my area of work. So in terms of, as you said, that there are societies after the industrialization or coal change that totally got written about, and we don't want to feel that same in the energy sector now. So there are Scottish Enterprise, Green Jobs, Digital Jobs Fund, and the government is providing funding for those programs, which is for everybody to come together. But even from investment point of view, as I said, there less than 2% in funding goes to females. If you are a person of color, whether it's woman or man, it's 0.5%. Imagine the 99.5% funding going to a traditional startup funder. So how are we ever going to include people who are not there? So for that is the question, that having them at the same table, but also inviting the right not look out in the same places. I think problem of today is that we just invite the same people in our circle. We just have to go out, step out, and ask the right people the question, and there will be many able people who are able to provide those answers.
Thank you. I'm just thinking, Kate, in terms of what governments can do, that whole idea of mentorship and passing the mic, again, it's a holistic approach, which is maybe more difficult to implement. What are your thoughts on progress in that area?
And, I mean, I've got a real fear emerging from COP26 that in the urgency to meet our climate change ambitions and to deliver net zero, we think that the end justifies the means. And we have an opportunity, we're at a crossroads. Either we can come out of this with fairer prosperity, or we come out of this just exacerbating inequalities. And I think, you know, if you take from a finance perspective, and obviously that's my particular interest, we have seen over the last few days the announcement of significant sums of funding being made available. But those sums of money, if they're spent wrongly, will just disenfranchise the very minority groups that we're talking about. We see an element of that already. For example, in the rewilding agenda, really important. But if that displaces people and puts people out of work, then how do we do this in a way which is far more just and creates jobs? I actually think, having visited Jennifer's business in the last few days, I think she is a perfect example. Her business is a great example of how we can do both. Starting with those who are most vulnerable, most disadvantaged, working with them, for example, on measures like energy efficiency, you end up reducing the number of people in fuel poverty and delivering net zero. But that's a choice. Governments must make that choice. We must hold them to account, and we must hold all businesses to account as well, particularly the financiers who are key to this, because we can't do it with public funding alone. But there needs to be regulation in place to ensure that we deliver the just transition, because as I said a few moments ago, it's not inevitable.
Yeah, and just thinking about, you know, the female representation in governments, we live in a climate where, you know, people can be cancelled immediately for this, that and the next thing. You can understand why maybe more and more women it's going backwards in terms of feeling confident about putting their head above the parapet. How do you feel about that?
Absolutely. I have two younger sisters, and the more they see of what I have to put up with, and I see Joanna Cherry in the audience as well, who has had her fair share of real abuse, and the more that they see of what we have to put up with on social media or elsewhere, the less likely they are. So it requires bravery, it requires courage, and it requires a commitment to not back down, because we are stronger together than if we are divided. And I think it's just wonderful to be able to share a platform with young women. Usually I'm the young woman in the audience, but with women that make me feel middle-aged. So hats off to you.
Well, the thing is, this organisation, Renew the World, is all about encouraging conversations like this, but actually to come up with some kind of actions, an action plan at the end of something like this. So here we are with these wonderful young women, and we don't want this to end and just be like, off you go, bye. We might get in touch with you at some point. We want to come up with, if possible, as we come towards the end of this session, with maybe just, you know, some blue sky thinking or some actual possible plans that you might put forward, and then we might be able to keep in touch with you all and take you into decision-making processes, so that we don't just finish this in a way where we end up thinking, well, that was great, but what happens next? So I wonder if we could just sort of go round everybody, younger and older, and just with your thoughts on what you would like to see come out of this. If there was, you know, go for it, if there's something specific that you would like to be involved in. So, I mean, Molly, you're at the end, so I'm coming to you first.
Thank you. No, I think that we always need to keep accountability in mind. We need to be holding the decision makers accountable, the governments accountable, those with the seats of power at the moment accountable. But I think we also need to be holding ourselves to account and considering what we are doing and the systems that we may be upholding as well. And I find it ironic in some sense for me to be speaking on a panel and talking about accessibility when some tickets for the New York Times Climate Hub are £400 for a day. And I could never afford that. So I think we need to be looking at holding ourselves to account as well, and really looking inwards and thinking, what systems am I upholding? But ultimately making sure that we're shifting the onus and responsibilities onto governments and those in positions of power to make sustainability and a response to the climate emergency accessible to everyone.
Thank you. I think I haven't watched online, but I think there is also, people can watch online, but you know, you're absolutely right, there's a barrier there in terms of expense to actually coming, as well as all the travel and everything else. Thanks for that, Molly, that is terrific. Who would like to, who wants to go next? Go for it.
I think Keynes when it's like school level as well, because it's not really taught in school that much. Like our schools just have been starting to teach environmental sciences. I think that should be rolled out everywhere, kind of.
Yeah.
And options.
Yeah, that's a great idea, actually. Kate?
Just briefly, I had the privilege of speaking to a group of primary school girls last week, and I told them that as their politician, they were ultimately my boss, which prompted them to put up on social media how delighted they were to find out they were Kate Forbes' boss. But it goes to the point about accountability. They hold me accountable, but I have got to make the time and the space to speak to them and hear from them. So more of that, more intentional listening that leads to action, which can come out of this. So my one little action is 9th of December, I've got the Scottish Government's budget. You can hold me accountable for whether or not I deliver on my words today in that budget, because money matters, doesn't it?
Thank you. We'll hold you to that. Thank you. Anna, what about you? It's that idea that, as I say, genuinely we don't want this just to be a lovely discussion and then nothing happens. Is there something that you would like to happen at the end of this, for you perhaps, or for other people that you represent?
Yes, I think that...
Can you hold your mic a little bit nearer? Thank you.
I think there's something that can be really useful in holding people in power accountable is the science. The IPCC shows us the best available science, and there has not been a single thing talked about at COP so far, a single ambition put in place, a pledge, a promise, a pact that has been in line with the best available science we have. So that is something that we need to put pressure on those people in power to make sure that they are actually in line with the science. Because otherwise, what's the point? And that also needs to come into having the concept of equity as well, which means they need to work even harder and there's an even higher standard. But looking at that science, that is fact, is completely indisputable, and actually listening to that and putting it into concrete words and actions, because we've heard a lot of empty promises over the past week, and we are inevitably going to hear them next week too. But enough is enough, and it's a bare minimum to stay in line with basic fact that is indisputable, and that's what we need to see before we can build on it.
Thank you very much indeed. Anjali, what about you?
Yeah, I would just like to come back to Cara's point about education. I think a key bit of this, and especially when we're talking about engaging women, is making sure that we're empowering women from a young age to know that their voice has worth. So what you were saying about telling primary school girls that they were your boss, I think that that's a step in the right direction, because oftentimes, like in classroom settings, we find that boys dominate the scene, and I don't think that this has been particularly helped by online school, I'll be honest, because the way it works, you can't see people who have their hands up, and I find that girls tend to have their hands up and boys tend to shout out. And so I think a key part of this is making sure that women know this from a young age, and making sure that we continue this throughout their whole lives. So having systems that come into place when girls are quite young, and then helping mobilise them and helping them get them on this track to influencing policy, because this is the way that we are going to have women in these rooms. This is the way that we're actually going to make changes in women's lives, especially when we're talking about the climate crisis. So I think it's just really important that we let women know that their voices matter. And I think that's the key message that I want to get out of today.
Thank you very much indeed. I think, although the clock is telling me something else, that we need to finish now, which means we don't hear from our panel. Do you want to say something quickly?
I think I'll respond to that point of education. As I said in the beginning, that education is the key for everything. And when you said empowerment, I'll take the other point. It's enabling people. It's giving the people to say ability to make that change. And your science-based targets, if you look at the GCSE results, A-level results, or even the universities, women are in equal number or more in the science-based subjects or even analysis of data. So if we have to put science-based targets, why not? They are equally well placed to make those analysis and hold accountable. So that is the key, that education and empowerment and financial independence is going to put women at the front, and that is what is going to, because it's not anybody else's problem. I think it's all of us problem, so we have to work together, and that's the only way to make it work.
Thank you very much indeed. Sorry to wind up so quickly. John Kerry's in next. I don't want to keep him waiting. Thank you very much indeed. I hope you've enjoyed this. I think we've all been inspired, particularly by the young voices and our expert panel too. Thank you very much indeed. And just watch this space. Look out for Renew the World and what happens next things will be happening off the back of this. So thank you very much indeed, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.